Hi, I'm Brooke Erdman, and today I'm so happy to be speaking with the physician and ophthalmologist Chris Knobbe. And we're going to talk about diet and his diet in particular, and the health of the eye. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Brooke? Thanks for having me on.
So nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
So can I just start with, what was your kind of process and how you started to look at your own personal nutrition, and then maybe how it developed into nutrition for the health of the whole body and your clients?
Sure. So, well, the thing is I grew up as an athlete. I came from a very athletic family, at least, so I had two older brothers, and so we were all athletes, football, basketball, track, and I just, from there, I just always really had this interest in fitness and in health, but I went to a traditional allopathic, orthodox medical school, University of Colorado School of Medicine. And really, you learn absolutely nothing about nutrition in medical school. And if you do learn anything, it's wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
If you learn anything, it's wrong. And because there's no attention to it. But anyway, so I left medical school in 1990. I went through my training, and actually what happened is that about 3 or 4 years later, when I was about 33, 34 years old, I was getting arthritis, mostly in my knees at that point, which I attributed to just being a jogger. Back then, I don't do this anymore, but back then I would jog like 5 or 6 miles a day, 3 times a week. And then I'd go to the gym, 4 or 5 days a week and lift weights and all that. But anyway, I just thought it was about, I was just exercising too much, and I just attributed it to that, but things kept getting worse. And I've said this many times, but I saw family doctors, internal medicine doctors, orthopedic surgeons, and 2 rheumatologists, because my arthritis just got so severely bad over the next 16 years. And in 2011, I saw the second rheumatologist that I had seen, and he did this extremely thorough exam, and he said, Chris, your arthritis in your knees looks like you're a 400-pound man. And at the time, I was about 210 pounds, and I was pretty fit, a little overweight, but still pretty fit. And he said, but the thing is the arthritis in your neck and your elbows are just as bad, and they're not weight bearing.
Wow.
So he put me on colchicine, an immunosuppressant, and I went home and I took that for that day and the next morning. And the very next day, as fate would have it, my brother was telling me about the Paleo Diet. They'd lost a bunch of weight on that. And so I thought, and so I started doing some investigation about paleo and found out that it was anti-inflammatory, and that really just made my antennae stand straight up. And what I did was I eliminated the next day. Well, I quit the drug, the colchicine, because I wanted to do my own test, and I thought I can't do both, otherwise I won't know which is which. So I quit the drug, which was going to take 2 or 3 weeks to even start kicking in, is what the rheumatologist told me. And I stopped all medication. I took all, stopped all anti-inflammatories. And the next day, I eliminated grains. And about 3 days later, I eliminated dairy. And believe me, I don't know that these were my main issues, but nevertheless, in about 8 days, I was 80% better with my arthritis.
So eliminating grains, bread, all grain, but not. But at that point, it was just grain.
Well, yeah, and honestly, Bart, I'm not sure that today I can eat a lot of grains. So I'm not vilifying grains or dairy.
Yeah.
Because what happens is when you remove something, you fill that something in. If that was 40% of your diet, you fill that in with other things.
Yeah.
And what if that other 40% was meat, for example, right? Now, all of a sudden I'm getting nutrients, a lot of nutrients, and maybe I'm eliminating other stuff, you know, because now I'm not eating grains and maybe dairy. Well, maybe, you know, maybe I'm not getting as many vegetable oils. You know, you have to think all of these things. So it wasn't nearly as simple as I thought. And, but anyway, it was so transformative to my life that I could be 80% better off of drugs in 8 or 10 days with my arthritis. This was life-changing because I was headed to be completely and utterly crippled. My arthritis was so severe at that point.
So you saw that just a dietary change made this huge change in how you felt and how you could perform.
Massive change. It was still to this day, it may be the most transformative thing that's ever happened. It's the reason I'm here today is because of what that did for me in that 1 week. And, you know, my doctor colleagues and friends, and some of them not friends, that I saw professionally about my arthritis, nobody ever mentioned that diet might have anything to do with my arthritis. Never. It was always a drug or an injection of some sort, and none of those did much for me. It was just a downhill course. And but anyway, so I kind of followed paleo for about 4 years, and then I started deeply investigating nutrition myself. But as far as my own personal story, I'll tell you that I started getting worse again with my arthritis about 4 or 5 years later. And I had all these ups and downs, and I tried all these different things. I did the autoimmune protocol diet. I did low FODMAP diet. I was treated for SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, just on a hunch that it might help because my arthritis was worse and better. And then I finally found out that I was sensitive to oxalates, which are the 2-carbon molecule that is, high in spinach, nuts and seeds, rhubarb, and potatoes. That helped me. Then I started getting worse again. And long story short, just a few months ago, I found out from a researcher in Kansas City who had a very similar story, that she was iron deficient. And I found out that I was iron deficient. And so treating my iron has been another huge benefit. But this is probably the first time I've ever spoken about this part of it publicly. But that's been, so that's
a recent discovery about the iron. Was that like a copper iron balance ratio?
I'm sorry?
Was that a copper iron balance ratio?
I don't know about the copper. I was just retested yesterday and did another battery of tests. The first go around, I wasn't tested for some of those microminerals like copper, zinc, and selenium, but those are on my next battery of tests. But one of the things, Brooke, that this has taught me, first of all, is number one is I am a lifetime student of nutrition, and I don't profess to hold all the answers. Yeah. I am trying to learn, and I'm trying to get better, and I'm trying to help people day in and day out. And every day I'm learning and exploring and investigating. And some of that is using my own body for testing. But I'll tell you what, here's the great, I just turned 60 years old last month, and I am in better shape physically, and I feel better. My health is the best it's been since I was in my 20s.
Wow, great. So
I'm in the kind of, I can lift heavy weights, I sprint, I run stairs, I do, high intensity interval training, and, literally I'm in the best health that I've ever been, but I'm still working on it. I'm still a work in progress.
direct personal experience for the win. I mean, awesome,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that was how you have discovered most all these things, really, your direct personal experience.
Yeah.
And lest we not fall into the hubris of thinking that we know it all with nutrition. In fact, it seems like sometimes when I think back of all this sort of routes I've taken to discover, the best species appropriate diet for me, those cheat things, those cheat meals people talk about can sometimes be the saving grace of people who have explored in different kinds of diets.
Yeah.
Like the vegan who goes out for burgers, once in a while. Those.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And one of the things I hesitate in saying this, but I don't put much faith at all in macronutrient ratios. In other words, I'm not a low carb guy. I'm not a low fat guy. I'm not low protein, but all of the population studies, everything I have learned in the last decade now of research and investigation, and most of the last decade, this is what I've done. There is evidence that all of those macronutrient ratios can work if you pay attention to the big picture, and that's to get those processed foods, the sugars, refined flours, vegetable oils, and trans fats. So if you cheat, don't do it with foods that have the vegetable oils and trans fats, especially. Like, I would say never, ever, ever cheat with French fries from a restaurant.
Yes.
That is the worst possible cheat you could ever do. Can you cheat with? You'd be way better off cheating with a candy bar, that's just a bunch of sugar and it's just, it's junk. But
yeah. Or take that potato home and make those French fries in tallow.
Oh yeah, you could do that. And this is what I tell people, because and people don't do this to me as much anymore, but people used to say to me, I guess I've got enough articles out there and information and interviews and whatnot that people don't ask this as much anymore. But people used to say to me all the time, they're like, well, can I eat Mexican food? Can I eat Chinese? Can I eat Vietnamese? And I'm like, it doesn't matter what you eat. Respect the ancestral principles and make your foods out of those. And if you want to make donuts, you can make them out. If you're not gluten sensitive, you can make donuts and cook them in a really good pasture raised lard. And heck, people in the 19th century made donuts and desserts and all that in the United States a lot. But what did they make them out of? They would have been using a whole grain organic wheat, because that's all there was back then, before 1880. And they would have been cooking that in lard.
In fact,
and the lard was from pasture-raised pork. And that's very, very, very different than pork raised in CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, because then those animals, their fat is the linoleic acid, the omega-6 in their fat goes way up. And so people have looked at there's a couple of people that looked at my presentations. They said, well, on one of your slides, it shows that pork fat is 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. And in another slide, the pork fat was like 10.5%. And I said, well, because one, and you don't have time to point this out, in your brief 30 or 45-minute presentations usually, but the first one is an ancestrally raised pork. That's an animal that's out grazing on grass and eating worms and grub and all that they normally would eat. The other one is a pig that's raised in a concentrated animal feeding operation eating GMO corn and soy. They're completely, utterly different.
Yeah, raised on corn.
So they change our body in different ways. So that, when people think of, like all olive oil is the same, not even close. 80% of it is adulterated with cheap vegetable oils. Maybe, the other 20% might be good. I don't trust any of it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know which ones to really trust. And the omega-6 in olive oil could range. I saw a study that looked at 820 different, I think they were all extra virgin olive oils, 820 different ones they analyzed. And the omega-6 linoleic acid ranged from, I think it was 3 to 23%.
Yeah.
So how do you know which one is the omega-6 3% and the other one's 23%? You'll never know that. You don't.
Yeah, it's not worth the risk. Not worth the risk.
No, it's not worth the risk. And this is why I just say to people, the easiest thing to do, using that 80-20 rule to get all the bang for your buck, the Pareto principle. What's the low-hanging fruit? Just get rid of all the oils. I mean, now I'll consume some coconut oil, but in general, everything else gets cooked in butter.
Yeah. Oh,
it's so butter so easy to do.
So butter's your preferred. You use ghee probably, or?
I'm not sensitive to the proteins in.
I mean, just for the burning smoke point.
I just use 100% grass-fed butter. That's what I use.
And so do you use tallow? I'm just curious now.
No, I don't, but I think it would be if it was a grass-fed tallow, I think it would be fabulous. Now the butter, the one thing that is better about butter than tallow is it's going to give you more vitamins A, D, and K2. Tallow and pork lard are going to be really low in those vitamins. But
even if it's tallow specifically made from the suet of the animal, from that kidney fat that's really high in stearic acid, would that still, you think, be lower in
I think even that perinephric fat that you're talking about would be lower in fat soluble vitamins A, D, and K2 than butter, because the cow is going to put the fat soluble vitamins in the milk for the baby to be raised on. They're not going to be, they're going to be in much greater concentration, even though butter doesn't have a huge amount, but it's enough for most people. If they're not eating organ meat, getting other really good sources of fat soluble vitamins like organ meats, like liver, heart, kidneys, all that, and they're not consuming a good quality cod liver oil, like a cold pressed extra virgin cod liver oil, or they're not eating fish eggs, for example, fish roe. In other words, good sources of these fat soluble vitamins, if they are at least consuming a grass-fed butter and hopefully maybe pasture-raised eggs, they're going to get sources of those fat soluble vitamins. And this is the thing that, vegetable oils have they've supplanted and replaced these animal fats that give us those vitamins. That's just the nutrient part of this. The toxicity is another part of this, as you know.
Yeah, so it's they replace really the sacred fats of our diet.
Yes.
And so we should probably mention Western A. Price in here. When did you run into his work?
Early 2013, that's what changed my life. And I wouldn't be here today talking to you. I wouldn't have a clue. I'd still be lost in nutrition if it weren't for Weston A. Price. Weston Price's research that connected westernized diets, essentially processed foods, to all this chronic disease. It wasn't until I understood that I had a framework of understanding that now I see the world of nutrition through that. And it always, always, always works for me. Everything, all the data, it always comes back to those things.
The power and the importance of animal fats in our diet. I mean, because, ancestral diets were based around whatever the region could supply and animal fat. So, no, it's fantastic. Yeah. That work was fantastic. So when did you connect it up specifically? Well, when did you start to see it specifically in working with the eye?
Well, I will say that there was a part, because I was always interested in nutrition, and I never was one of those ophthalmologists that saw huge numbers of patients per day. So I had some time to talk to my patients, and I always had a little bit of this interest in understanding what was driving disease through diet. It was always in the background, even though I was clueless. But there was a part of me that was just seeing that the overweight, the unhealthy people, the people that were getting heart disease and cancers, and diabetes, metabolic syndrome. Those were the same people that were getting macular degeneration. And it was kind of a recurring theme. And I was noticing this in my practice. And so that was always in the back of my mind, that something had to go together here. It just had to fit, and in contrast, the really fit, healthier people that were exercising and remained lean and and this is about all I knew before 2011. It just seemed like those people didn't have macular degeneration. I wrote about a gentleman in my book, my book about macular degeneration that came out in 2016. And I met this gentleman that I still remember to this day, and I don't know his name, and I wouldn't say it, of course, but he was 93 years old, and he was about 6'4". He towered over me, and he was so incredibly fit. I mean, he was leaner and fitter than me. And at the time, this is probably 10 years ago, and 9 or 10 years ago. So I was probably in my early 50s. So he was approaching twice my age. He was 93. He was one of the healthiest people I've ever seen. He didn't have a single disorder. He wasn't on a single medicine. And his entire life, he had grown up on a farm. All he ever ate was the farm that, the food they raised on their farm. And then he started his own farm, and then he shared animals with his neighbors. So he said, well, we don't like to eat our own animals. So he goes, but we eat the cattle and chicken and pork that my neighbors raise, and they eat ours, and vice versa. And we grow our own fruits, vegetables, or at least. And he said, so we don't hardly ever get anything from a grocery store. He's 93. And he didn't have any cataracts, and his maculas were in perfect shape. His central retina. That's and these are some of the things that they just stuck out in my mind. Like, okay, there's something about diet and all this disease. I'm just telling you, these are my experiences when I was still just in the early stages of trying to understand all this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I love it. He probably had a nice big round head too. Nice round head.
I'm telling you, the guy I just was in awe looking at this guy that, like I said, I felt like, I'll bet this guy could lift more than me. Could he outrun me? I'm thinking he's 93. He's 93 years old. That's and fantastic. You just don't see that. And I just had to sit and talk with him about his diet for like 5 minutes. I'm like, and again, this is back when I was just learning this, and I just said, where did you grow up? What were you eating? I just wanted to know, because this is how I always was. I'm just like, I would ask athletes in the gym. They're a really fit guy. I'd just say, what do you eat? Yeah. And I tried to understand, and, so there were some themes, that I was starting to gather just from talking to people.
Where did he grow up?
He grew up in Oklahoma.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He wasn't living on nuts and seeds. He was living on...
No. I don't think he had any nuts or seeds.
Yeah. Exactly.
No, they were eating beef, mostly beef. Pork and chicken. Yeah. Almost no fish.
Probably raw milk, maybe.
That I don't remember, and I didn't ask because I didn't understand that back then. I didn't ask about it. Mm-hmm. And he was eating mostly vegetables that came from their own farms, he and his neighbors.
Yeah.
But he didn't get hardly any food at all from grocery stores. He said almost everything they consumed came from his farm and neighboring farms.
Because, grocery stores, it's actually pretty modern. Like my parents, there might have been a little store on the corner, but most of their produce was from neighbors. Mm-hmm. The big grocery store is a pretty modern situation when you think about it. It doesn't go back that far.
Yeah, what he was doing was just commonplace. It was just normal in 19th century America, and probably most of the world was like that. But 19th century America, that's what a third of people lived rural, And that's what they did. They didn't need to or buy a lot of food from grocery stores. A huge percentage of the population, they were doing exactly what he did. They were raising their own animals and crops and whatnot, and that's what they were living off of.
I want to ask you what your diet is now, but first off, I just want to ask you this question about fish oils. You know, it's still kind of it's a definitely a hazy area for me about the importance of fish oils, or they also are high in polyunsaturated fatty acids. I mean, so it's a little confusing for me. And some people talk about the toxicity of fish oils. I think roe is a little different because it's still in the egg.
Yes.
So can you share a little bit about what you think about fish oils, or like people taking fish oil supplements?
Okay, well, so the first question you ask about my current diet, and I do eat a lot of meat, but I always have. I eat everything. The majority of my meat comes from a nearby. I live in the Denver, Colorado area, and I get all my meat from one ranch that raises all their cattle ancestrally. They're all raised on grass. They're never vaccinated or given hormones or anything like that. They don't ever eat grain or GMO or anything like that. So I eat a lot of beef. I eat. I'm going to say that's 60% of my what I call meat. And meat to me is anything that comes from animals. I eat maybe 10% chicken, and that is pasture raised chicken also. Yeah. Same thing. And then I maybe eat around 20 to 30% of my, again, what I would animal foods as wild caught fish. Oh. And I get that from a Whole Foods market near me here in Boulder, Colorado. So I live really close to Boulder. I just say Denver because it's easier for people to know about. But anyway, and then I eat organic fruits and vegetables, and that are basically kind of low oxalate. Like I eat bananas, apples, pears, those kind of things. So some iceberg lettuce. I don't eat spinach anymore because it's so high in oxalates. I don't eat nuts and seeds at all. I do eat, some people think this is a nutritional sin, but I eat some organic corn chips cooked in coconut oil. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I do that because we make taco salad, and I love that. So I use those for some of that. I do eat some non-gluten organic tortillas.
Do you eat winter squash?
No, I don't. But I for the most part, I don't really see issues with most fruits and vegetables in general. I mean, people can have lots of issues with those. But I'm just saying, again, this is just my diet. I'm not professing anybody needs
absolutely.
to eat exactly like me.
And do you eat nightshades?
Eat what?
Nightshades?
No, not really. I really don't. Well, no, wait, I take that back. So for those people who don't know, nightshades are potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. And so I take it back because I do eat potatoes now, white, and some sweet potatoes, but I eat some white potatoes, and I eat some peppers, and I'm doing pretty well with that now that the rest of my diet is good, and I am taking an iron supplement because I was deficient in iron. So I'm taking a heme iron supplement, and I am almost loath to take supplements. I try to get all of my nutrition as much as possible from real whole food.
Do you eat organ meat, like liver?
Yes, I do. So I eat liver, pancreas, heart. I just got some kidneys for the first time. I haven't eaten those yet. Yes, and I eat. I don't take extra virgin cod liver oil, although I do recommend it. It's just that I get a ton of vitamins from, because I eat a lot of organ, a lot of organ meats. I eat quite a lot of beef liver and chicken liver, good quality pasture raised chicken liver, which is good, high in vitamins A and D, and it'll have K2. So I eat chicken. So I eat beef liver and chicken liver, and we eat sushi. So we always get the fish eggs. They're called roe in the restaurant, ROE. Yeah. And roe are an incredible, as you know, are incredible source of the fat soluble vitamins. Price found people like the Bolivian Indians who they would trek from 17,000 feet, I think it was, and take a 2-week trek to get to the ocean to find fish and bring all the way back to their homes at 17,000 feet elevation, I think it was, to get one thing, and it was fish eggs, because that's how nutritious they are. But anyway, so anytime we eat sushi, which is about twice a month, I always get at least 3 or 4 orders of roe. Yeah. And so I don't take extra virgin cod liver oil, but I think for people that don't eat organ meats and who just despise liver and who are not eating fish eggs really regularly, things like that, I do think they should try to get a good source of vitamins A, D, and K2, and you could get and extra virgin cod liver oil would be the way to go there. So our daughter, for example, I've got a 22-year-old daughter, and she won't eat liver at all. So she takes the extra virgin cod liver oil capsules. We get those from Rosita, and that's at Corganic.com. And I don't have any financial interest in any foods or any product whatsoever. But anyway, that I think is a really good cod liver oil, and so I have her take that and ancestrally raised beef liver capsules, which is dried beef liver.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's a couple really good ancestral desiccated organ companies out there.
Yeah.
Ancestral.
But I mean, I always tell people, you can make perfectly good ancestral Mexican food, Chinese food, Japanese, Greek, Mediterranean, you name it. It doesn't matter where the derivation is, the origin. It doesn't matter what you're making. You can just make it using those ancestral ingredients and principles, and it will work, and it will work wonders for you. So in other words, it's like, I mean, people living in Japan don't want to eat like we do. Right. And they need to, yeah. So they follow their native traditional Japanese diet, and it works. It's the same for us. It's the same for the people in the Netherlands, but everybody has their own native traditional diet. I mean, obviously, Eskimos and the Inuit in northern Americas and Alaska, if they're on a native traditional diet, it's not going to be like an American. No. Right? But so if they're living off of seal oil and fish and caribou and elk, that's their native traditional diet. They don't get any fruits or vegetables. Like they have a few berries in the summer, for a couple of weeks, and that's it.
There was no broccoli growing up in the Arctic.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How are they going to get that?
Yeah, exactly.
And yet it works brilliantly. And this is exactly why we come back to carnivore. Why does carnivore work? It eliminates all those processed foods. It's deeply nutritious. There's nothing toxic about it, assuming you're consuming native, traditionally raised, ancestrally raised. Like if it was just beef, that was raised on grass. Why does it work? It's got everything you need.
Got everything you need.
There it is. Eat the whole animal. That's all you need to eat.
You didn't mention pork. Is that because you didn't mention, or you avoid?
No, and pork, you can, the thing about pork, it's hard to get pasture raised pork, but there are places that do raise it. I don't get pasture raised pork, but it's perfectly great food. A great example of this was I think it was the Tokelauans way back in the 60s or 70s, and I might be wrong about this, or it might have been the Papua New Guineans. I can't remember, but anyway, one of them, they evaluated the pork fat, and they determined that those ancestrally raised pork had 2% omega-6 linoleic acid in their fat.
Perfect.
And that's where I get that number. It's from one study. I mean, I mean, some of these ranchers that are raising pork in the traditional way, with their swine, their pigs out grazing and, consuming, again, they're omnivores. So they'll eat grass and grubs and worms and
little animals. Yeah.
Little animals. Yeah. Which is why they're a lot like people. But yeah, pork, you could live off of pork if it's raised naturally, and it would work.
I've read that like pork belly, U.S. pork bellies are actually they get the lowest amount of money. Like Danish pork, which is finished on barley as opposed to corn, and barley is a much lower fat content of a grain, just have a higher stearic acid content, and they're a firmer fat. It's just probably going to be. So it's interesting. So, where you get your pork is a big difference, huge difference.
Oh, extraordinary. This is the most important point for people to understand, is that you can't look at any, you can't look at two animals and say, their fat is the same. One is raised out eating, eating grass like cattle, and another one is in a concentrated animal feeding operation eating grains and, GMO grains. To me, they're just not, almost night and day difference.
Although we do get a little bit of a reprieve with these ruminant animals, because they are able to transform in ways that the pig, the monogastric animals can't do it.
Yes.
Fat in, fat out, and ruminants do give us a little bit of extra fortune that way.
Yeah, no question. I mean, even if they were eating, let's say they're eating McDonald's hamburgers, and which are all going to be CAFO raised, and they avoided everything else where they could get vegetable oils, you could do a ton of that, and that would be so fantastically much better than eating the processed foods that contain the vegetable oils.
Yeah.
Sure, it's not going to be as as good a meat as the pasture raised beef, but in comparison, back to this 80-20 rule, if you even just look at that would be fantastically better than eating the French fries that are cooked in the vegetable oil. I mean,
isn't that wonderful? That's so wonderful. Even if you just get to whatever someone could afford with ground beef they're buying at Walmart or whatever, it's like light years away from what we were talking about as far as seed oil and problems. It's amazing.
Yes. If you consumed the CAFO raised beef, pork, and chicken that came from your grocery store, the cheapest meats there, and you avoided all the other processed foods that contain the vegetable oils, just like you said, you would be so far ahead of where you would otherwise be. It's not even funny. That would be, and the next step, of course, is instead of eating those CAFO raised meats, is I call them ancestrally raised, or they're pasture raised. Again, that's another step, but everything is an increment. This is where people, especially business people and motivational people, they talk about the 80-20 rule. What's the lowest hanging fruit? Where can I do one little thing that gives me 80% of the benefit? And that would be eliminate seed oils. And then beyond that, there's fractals. They talk about fractals. How can I what's the next step? Next step is so first, eliminate vegetable oils. Next step is eliminate sugar, for example. Next step is eliminate white flour, start getting more ancestral, and then eliminate processed foods. And then if you really want to get clean, the best clean diet, as bodybuilders would say, now you move to ancestrally raised animals, so you keep taking fractal steps towards a better and better diet if you want to. But you got to get the big picture. Just get the big picture first, and get to the low-hanging fruit first.
Absolutely. And then eventually maybe you could get to that Oklahoma farm that the man who's 92 years old was raised on.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and for sharing your information. It's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, and it's an honor, Brooke. Thank you so much. Thanks for interviewing me. It was fun, and just so people know, they can find more of my work and especially information about macular degeneration at cureamd.org. It's our nonprofit foundation, Cure AMD Foundation. Nobody in this organization, including me, is paid by this organization. This is a totally nonprofit. Our goal is to do more research because I want to stamp out macular degeneration, and we can do it. I believe, and all of my colleagues, researchers that are working with me, we believe we can eliminate this disease. It's possible to eliminate this disease and all this other chronic disease along with it through ancestral dietary strategy. That's exactly what we talked about in this interview right here. It's that simple.
Thank you so much. And don't hang up when I'm going to turn off the recording. And thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Brooke.
This
Appreciate it.
Great.